Hello and welcome to episode 39 of the Ego Chall Podcast, a Call of Duty esports podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we will be discussing another reported roster change for the New York Subliners. We will also be talking about last week's CDL qualifying matches, which were the first set for the second major of the 2022 Call of Duty League season. And we also have another set of qualifying matches this week, later on this week, that we're going to give our predictions for. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. Business as usual. Got some stuff to talk about. I'm ready to hop in.
Yeah, let's start at the very top. This is actually very new news for us as we're recording this podcast. On .esports.com, Crone reported that the New York Subliners are expected to sign Paul X, who just recently finished a week-long stint as a temporary substitute for the London Royal Ravens. Paul X was also a part of the Royal Ravens actual roster last season in the 2021 CDL season. So this would be another move for the New York Subliners, who have they already benched Neptune after, I believe, the first week of CDL matches this season. They brought in Royalty, who eventually was benched for Neptune again before the first major of the season. The Subliners are currently in last place in the CDL, if you can believe that. They are not only 0-2 so far in this set of qualifying matches, but they are 1-6 overall. They have, I believe, the worst map count as well, or they're 1-6 maps for so far during like this stage of qualifying matches. But they're also doing very poorly for the entire season, considering they were knocked out of the first major with a 3-0 sweep. They were also one of the last four teams that started the major, so they were one of the bottom four teams in the first major's qualifying matches. So a lot of things have went wrong for a roster that we expected quite a bit from. What do you think of this move, this reported move that Paul X will be joining the roster? We don't really know who he will be replacing in the roster. There was also a part of this report that another player might be coming into New York and coming into the starting lineup. So a lot of big changes. What do you make of Paul X coming into New York, possibly?
Yeah, we'll probably touch on Paul X in depth a little more as we go through the matches from the past week and a recap of those, because obviously those are the matches he just played in. So it'd make more sense to talk about his like individual performance during those matches. But TLDR on that, he played really well for London this past week. So I'm not surprised at all that New York is kind of like jumping at the opportunity to try and sign him. It is interesting though, and we do have to keep in mind that, like you said, we don't know who is being replaced by Paul X, or if there's potentially another player coming in as Crone reports. Who else would be moved to the bench as the corresponding move there? So there's a lot of stuff up in the air right now with this New York situation, and we're just going to have to wait and see. The good news, though, is that they play on Saturday this weekend. So if they are making a roster move before their next official match, we will, you would assume there's an announcement before Saturday made, or you'll just, see the new squad in action on Saturday. There's also the potential, if there's, they might be trying out multiple forests, in which case we could see like scrim stuff leak. I don't know. A lot of teams haven't been streaming scrims since the season started, so that might not happen, but that's always been a possibility in the past. And I forgot I was going to say another possible situation there. We could see that. And there's something else I was going to say, but I forget. But, you know, overall, I think good move by New York. They have to do something because what's going on right now isn't working. and Paul has shown, in a very small sample size just this past week, that he can quickly be inserted into a prior existing lineup and just immediately have an impact for that squad. So, kind of if New York is making this move, that's got to be what they're hoping for, is that he'll immediately have an impact upon joining the team and try and, turn things around for the squad after a pretty poor start to the 2022 season.
To put a little more context behind that about how bad of a start it's been for them. So technically they're not in last place because the New York Subliners and the Paris Legion both have a single win this CDL season, but Paris has one more loss. But Paris also has a better map win percentage. Paris is 11-26 with a 30% map win percentage. New York has won 7 of their 30 maps this season, which is a 23% map win percentage. And when you break it down, and this is according to breakingpoint.gg, their hard point is horrendous. Like they are, I mean, I don't have it right in front of me about the entire league stats, but they have to be one of, if not the worst hard point team in the league. They
haven't won a hard point in official matches. I think we touched on it last week, and I think we were looking at stats that included Kickoff Classic, because obviously they did win a match at Kickoff Classic, but they're 0-13 in hard points since the regular season started.
Yeah, that's like, even if you counted the Kickoff Classic, they've only won 3 hard points. Like that's I mean, that makes sense considering they've only won a single series in the regular season. They had a 3-2 victory against Boston in the first major qualifiers. But other than that, there hasn't been much to be positive about in regards to New York. This team is surprisingly bad, and I think we were if we go back to before the regular season started, and this might have actually been before the Kickoff Classic, if maybe I'm mistaken, but we talked about the coaches' power rankings and what the coaches thought of each team heading into the season, and they were kind of like a middle of the pack team, maybe a little bit lower, maybe like around that 7-8 range, which is not great, obviously, but it would, if they had been a 7th or 8th place team, they would be starting every major in the winners bracket, and they would theoretically just have as just good of a chance as, say, like Atlanta or Optic, because they wouldn't have to fight through the losers bracket the entire time. But they're so bad, and I feel bad for them, because you even see it in their tweets. Like Clayster, before the major, said that he hadn't practiced this much in a while, like in years or something. Like he put in so much work before the major, and he said, like, I hope it goes well or whatever. And then after they got knocked out 3-0, he just said, nope, still suck. Never mind. Like that's how it goes for them. They're just really bad right now, and I think roster change is pretty much the only course of action for them at this point, because they tried to get rid of Neptune and bring in Royalty, which, I mean, I think a lot of people wondered why they did that in the first place. Then they reverted back to Neptune. It doesn't seem like it's working with Neptune in the roster either. So I don't really know what the solution is. I don't think they know what the solution is, really. They're probably just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that one thing sticks. If it's Paul X, or if it's another Challengers player, if it's a trade with another CDL team, they're just hoping that something or someone will be able to get them out of this hole.
Yeah. I think like kind of like you just said there, not exactly the start anyone was expecting, but can't do anything about that now. Got to put everything that's happened up to this point in the rearview mirror, especially if you're making a 2-man change. Just got to try and pick up the pieces and move on and rebound as fast as possible, because, I mean, we're going into the second week of online qualifiers for the second major, and that might not seem like much, but there's only 4 majors and then champs, so we're technically just a couple weeks away from the halfway point of the season already.
And we also don't know if champs will be a 12-team event or if they will only invite like the top 8 or top 6. I don't think that information has been announced.
I think they did in the.
Let me look.
I think they just said it might have been in the first community update when they announced the like confirmation that 12 teams will be at the majors, but they said like 8 teams will still be at champs, or it was part of Crone's report on the 12 teams for the majors.
Okay.
I feel like
Okay, no, it
I
does
read
say
something.
that eight teams will enter playoffs. The top 2 seeds will no longer get buys, and the bottom 2 seeds will no longer start in the losers bracket. So it's just an
Where
8-team bracket essentially.
is that on the CDL site?
Yeah, that's in
Cool.
the 2022 season format.
Yep.
So I mean that makes it even worse that they know that essentially if they continue to be one of these like bottom level teams that they won't make it to champs. They'll be like Seattle or like London last year or whatever. Like they just know going into the last few weeks that it's pretty much over for them and there's nothing they can really do about it. But I mean, there's a lot of time left, so there is an I don't know how likely of a chance, but there is a chance that they can turn things around and become, obviously qualify for champs and be a good team by the end of the season. But yeah, let's get to so that we got that out of the way. Let's get to these matches from the past week. We're actually starting off with a New York match. They kicked off the last week of the qualifying matches against the London Royal Ravens. So we had not talked about it, but Paul X he was a stand-in for London for this match and their other match this week. Because Gizmo, he went back home to England, or I think he lives in England, and he had some personal issues that he was dealing with. So Paul X, who was on the Royal Ravens roster last season, he stepped in, and they did pretty well. London did. They win 3-1. This was, I mean, just kind of emblematic of New York season. In all honesty, they just really can't win hard points, and we've talked about it before, but hard points makes up 2/5 of an entire series. It's very difficult to win matches without winning either the most important or second most important game mode. Do you have any thoughts on this series in particular?
Yeah. Look, like you said, this was Paul X coming in for Gizmo. Also had the return of Neptune here, replacing Royalty for this immediate or for this week at least, following the major. So, um, I guess one thing we can say real quick is that if the report is true that Paul X is going to New York, that would mean in all likelihood Gizmo has to be back for this week.
That's
And I
true.
believe that's what Crone reported originally, is that he would likely be back. And obviously Paul X was signed to, I think it's a 14-day contract for
Yeah,
the
I think
CDL.
it's
It's
two
not a
weeks.
10-day. Yeah. So that's what he signed with London. So if they're going to move him to New York, they have to, be confident that Gizmo will be back for these matches. And we haven't heard anything, at least I haven't seen anything yet to officially confirm it, but you would assume if Paul X is moved, that Gizmo will be back. But that was the most shocking thing for me, was that, just how like seamlessly Paul was able to be inserted into this lineup, and it didn't seem like anything major had changed for London. Like, Gizmo has been one of the top players on London. He kind of struggled at the major, and he was tweeting, and Crohn's talked about like the personal issues and stuff going on with him. So like you can take his recent performance struggles with a grain of salt if you take that into account. But in the qualifiers and stuff, to kick off this year after the kickoff classic, he was performing really well and was being like widely considered in the community as like the top rookie at that time. And you could make the argument he still is right now, but hasn't played and had the recent struggle, so yada yada. Not something we got to worry about right now. But regardless, that's based on how he was playing before. his recent personal issues, that you would feel like he'd be a hard player to replace, just statistically. And Paul X didn't really have a problem with that. He dropped a .97 in this series in particular, but Afro had a 1.43 and Zero had a 1.26, so he did the job and did what he had to do to help London get this win here.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a lack of talent for New York because we already know that Hydra is incredible, and I do think that Neptune has a lot of potential. I don't really know what the options are for them or what will make them a winning team, but Paul X, like you said, he stepped in a tough spot. This is not it. London is an incredibly good team. There's no doubt about it. But to step in and they didn't really miss a beat at all says a lot about Paul, in my opinion. And kind of a different point, but I think that this is the perfect, like, the CDL. This is an awesome opportunity to showcase like the 14-day contracts and like the usefulness of them, because Paul, he is a former CDL player, like we mentioned, but he's been in challengers so far this season, and he hadn't been like a CDL substitute or anything, and he was able to get this 14-day contract and perform admirably, perform well for what they were expecting, and now he's getting reportedly signed to a like a full-time contract for a CDL team. So the CDL should take a lot of pride in the 14-day contracts seemingly working. Whether other players take advantage of that, or other teams, for that matter, take advantage of that and, try out challengers players, see if something works, and then kind of move on if it doesn't. But it's a great opportunity to showcase like what these 14-day contracts were actually meant for, to start with. Let's get to this next match. So London, they win 3-1. And then we have Seattle and Boston. We talked about this matchup last week briefly, but Seattle has obviously been on a skid. I think they were entering this match with like a 4-match losing streak, maybe a 3-match losing streak, but they were at least, I think it was actually 4, because I think they lost their last 2 matches of the qualifying matches. Then they were bounced from the major without a win, including that upset loss to Paris. But they come in here and they lose again, extending their losing streak to 5 matches. Boston wins 3-1. And honestly, it could have been a 3-0 because Seattle really clutched up in the control to extend that series to a second hard point. And then Capsidol, just a big cap. He's just he's flying around the map. He has 54 kills on Bokich hardpoint. What do you think of Boston? I think that they seem to be improving a lot over the past like week or two. And Seattle, at this point, they were on a 5-match losing streak. So what do you think of this?
Yeah, I think, how do I want to word it? I feel like my train of thought going into this match was I was expecting this to be like a good opportunity for Seattle to bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
I think, with the logic I was going with, it was they weren't facing like Optic or Atlanta right away. We'll obviously talk about that later situation later, but they weren't facing, like Boston being like a top 3 team, although they performed well at the major. Probably wouldn't consider them a top 3 or 4 team at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an opportunity for Seattle to bounce back, and they didn't capitalize on it. Um, the first hard point was 250, 159 for Boston. The search was 6-1 for Boston. The control was like super, like, Seattle won it, and Boston has had their struggles in control all year, so that's not like too big of a surprise. But then, we had a classic 250, 245 Bokage there where Big Cat breaks the kill record. So, yeah, I felt like this was a missed opportunity for Seattle to try to bounce back, but obviously it was a good job for Boston to continue building on the momentum they had from a strong major performance. And that was, a big takeaway for me was obviously Capsule setting the new mark of 54 kills. I believe that's the kill record for, it's got to be the kill record for any mode, but obviously most of the kill records have been on Bokage just because of how the nature of the cage. So so that's something I've been trying to keep track of and will continue to do. So shout out Big Cap there for setting the mark.
Big Cap's rookie of the year stock is definitely rising in the CDL. And now that there actually is a rookie of the year award, he could potentially be it. My pick was Pred. He did not have a great series. He dropped 8 kills in that Gavutu hardpoint to start the series, which has to be one of, if not the lowest number of kills this season in a hardpoint. He was 8-20. And they kind of got wiped off the map. So not a great showcase for my pick, but your pick, Sib, did pretty well.
Yeah, he's been really inconsistent though recently. He started out super hot and had some struggles there during Seattle Skid. I will say though, for Pred in particular, looking at his individual performance on Gavutu is, you can kind of I don't want to say completely throw it out the window, but you got to be a little skeptical just because he would be the only sub on Seattle, super AR heavy, super AR favored map. So he was probably, it's not like Seattle was getting a lot of rotations or anything. They lost by almost 100. So he was probably just getting picked off, trying to get to the points and stuff like that. So it was just tough map, but I wouldn't look too deep into that in particular for him.
Yeah, he probably threw his headset after that map, to be honest. Just getting gunned every time he started sprinting.
Just get me off this damn map.
The next match of the week was Los Angeles Guerrillas versus the Florida Mutineers. Florida, we'll talk about them again, but they come out, they sweep LAG. This is a pretty close series, all things considered, despite it being a 3-0. We had a 10-point difference on Bokich Hardpoint. Guys just trading kills left and right. S&D on Tuscan, 6-5 in favor of Florida, and then a 3-1 on Tuscan Control for Florida as well. Overall, this series was really slay heavy and definitely in favor of Florida, which you expect because this is also the team that lost a hard point when Big Wake was dropping a 34-16 on teams. So you would expect this to happen, but what do you think of Florida's 3-0 over LAG?
Yeah, this was surprising to me. Not only did I not pick Florida to win this match, but I definitely, if I were to pick them, I probably wouldn't have expected a 3-0. But like you said, it was a close series, at least in the first 2 maps. And LAG did put up a little bit of a comeback. I'm pretty sure it was a 5-1 comeback, and they forced around 11, and then Florida clutched up in the end. Dave Patty had a nice play on, wasn't in this one? It was Tuscan Search, I think. Yeah, because he sniped Slasher. He had it was either a 1v, I think it was a 1v2, but I don't know if somebody else was alive when he got the first kill or not. But he got a first kill, and then went down into the well by P5 on Tuscan, and then he sniped Slasher coming to challenge. So it was a nice play there. But yeah, I was kind of surprised by the end result, I guess you could say, and how dominant like I just said, the individual map scores were kind of close, but a 3-0 is a 3-0. So we can talk about Florida a little more in depth once we get to their other match. But as a little teaser, I guess I'll say is that this. Thinking about it now, it's not super surprising that we see Florida be an up and down team, especially if we compare it to some of Florida's rosters in the past.
Yeah, that's kind of what they've been known for and something that we talked about ad nauseum about them. But first place Florida, I'll just tease that for a little bit later. That was it for Friday's matches, which I just want to point out you were 0-3 in your predictions, and I did kind of troll in the Slack messages because I was 3-0 and you were 0-3, and it really narrowed the gap of our prediction records. But Saturday we had 4 matches. The first of which was Paris versus LAG. We do not think that Paris is winning champs on this podcast, and they proved why we are right. LAG, they come out and they win 3-0, which was obviously much needed after getting swept the previous day. This is just kind of what we expect. Paris was very Like they had a really good series against Seattle and a good fight against Boston at the major, but this was honestly also a new roster because Jimbo was making his debut for Paris. And I think it was the next day, like the Minnesota one was the one where he got roasted, right? So we'll get to it. But yeah, Jimbo did not have a good weekend. I hope he didn't look at any of his mentions. But yeah, LAG, they win 3-0. Any thoughts on this?
You know, you can look at this two ways. I think, heading into the week, both of us obviously predicted LAG, so we were expecting this result. But to be the match immediately following LAG's 3-0 or it's the match that followed them getting 3-0'd by Florida.
Yeah.
And literally, the exact consecutive match not only the following day, but it's just like the last match of Friday into that first match on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
So as small of a gap as you could have between those two matches, for a team like LAG with some guys who are super competitive and, just very results driven and trying to, win at all costs, however you want to word it, this could have been something like that loss on Friday could have tilted them and had a negative impact on their series here against Paris, but they didn't let that happen. So that I thought that was good to see. They came out and took care of business. Obviously, like I said, not a lot of time between the matches, so I don't know how much VOD review or anything they did like that. But leading up to this week of matches, I'm sure they're going to take a look back at that Florida series in particular and trying to fix some stuff, whatever went wrong. And maybe we'll see LAG put up another strong performance, build momentum off this Paris win. But yeah, like you said, this isn't the series in particular that Jimbo was getting roasted on Twitter for. But he did have a .75 in this series. He went 48 and 64. But all four players on Paris had negative KDs. All four players on LAG had positive KDs. And the big thing that I noticed in particular was that this was like a good bounce back series for Slasher. He went 61 and 42 for a 1.45 KD. And he had some struggles in LAG's last match at the major, and then in that series against Florida, he had a .8 KD. So really strong bounce back for him. Kind of silence any doubters, at least in the short term.
Yep. Before we move on, I just want to note that Trimmer said that Paris is winning champs trust. So I mean that's
okay.
I mean if the head Ego Chall correspondent is saying that, I think we should not.
I don't know. Did you? I put it in chat, but did you see the CDL had like a commercial during the major where they were asking the pros questions or whatnot, and they asked them like who was winning champs,
No.
and like a bunch of them were just saying their own team, and then it goes to Krim, and Krim is like, well, I'm not answering this. This is just bad juju. And then it goes to Shotzi, and Shotzi's like, yeah, I'm not going to answer this either because if I say us, it'll be bad juju, but if I pick somebody else, it could like fuel them. So I'm going to say Paris is winning champs. So Shotzi's in the Paris is winning champs category in that camp. So maybe Trem's finally hopping on the bandwagon because his boy is too.
I think the biggest thing that we learned from that is that Shotzi is actually an Ego Chall podcast listener. So make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Shotzi, because we would really appreciate that. But yeah, I hope he's. What if it did happen now though? Like Shotzi, he was just like, "Oh, I'll throw out a team, Paris or whatever." It's like, all right, Paris is now winning champs. Like, congrats, you played yourself. The next match of the week was London versus the Los Angeles Thieves. Again, Paul X standing in for Gizmo for London, and I don't know if they were feeling froggy, but they were like, let's take the Gavutu challenge first map, LAT, like Kenny was memeing, so we got to teach him a lesson. And London wins Gavutu Hardpoint game 1 by 62 points. Nasty drops a 1.6, 32 and 20 on the map. And then London also goes on to win Berlin Surge 6-4 and Gavutu Control 3-2 to sweep LAT, really solidifying that they are definitely not the 4th place team in the league. Like, they're at least top 3 now. And as we would see, they might be the 2nd best team in the entire league. So people are saying. But yeah, London, they win this 3-0. They improve their record, and really just a kind of shocking result in the fact that it was a 3-0 and that it wasn't an extended series. What did you think?
I mean, this was just a super shocking result to me in general. Like, if Gizmo was playing in the series, and you told me London won, I wouldn't have expected it to be a 3-0.
Mm-hmm.
But I probably wouldn't have been super surprised if you said London somehow pulled off a win. But for London to get a 3-0 over the Thieves without Gizmo, that again is just a testament to Paul, and obviously, um, it probably is one of the main reasons why he's reportedly getting picked up for a full-time spot on New York.
Yep.
So he had a 1.19 KD in the series, went 62 and 52. So strong performance out of him, possibly got him signed. I think I saw on Twitter after the match, I can't remember, it might have been JCap or Octane. I think it was JCap, like
Yeah, it
tweeting
was.
about like a bad week of practice leading up to it or whatever. So, yeah, he tweeted shit week of practice results in a shit match, super frustrating loss to start our stage 2 GGs to London. So, I guess that makes a little more sense, all things considered, but still, this was a surprising result to me. Especially these were coming off that loss at the major to Atlanta, not getting the finish that they likely wanted. So, in their first match back online, start 0-1, surprisingly.
Yeah, Kenny also tweeted something similar and said, "Shitty practice leads to shitty performances. Taking today as a reset and moving forward." So, I mean, it happens, but I wasn't expecting it. I'll say that
Nope.
they were having this bad practice. It would have been nice for my predictions if they would have let us know beforehand, though. So,
I still wouldn't have picked London here, especially with, Paul X filling in for Gizmo.
yeah. But congrats, London. They win 3-0. The next match of the day was Minnesota versus Toronto. We both picked Toronto, and they ended up winning 3-1. They did, in fact, win a hard point, which has been a point of contention for them. They were really just they were challenging themselves, it seemed, to try to win a series without winning hard points, and they did a pretty good job at it. They were actually, one of the top teams at the most recent major, but they win a hard point here. They win the series. What do you think of the Ultra beating the Rocker?
Yeah, like you said, we both predicted Toronto to win this one, and I think I kind of touched on it. Similar to my mindset with Seattle versus Boston last week in our last show. My mindset for this match in particular was that I wanted to see what kind of work Toronto was going to put in to try and improve at hardpoint, and I felt like this was a good matchup for them to try and do that in, just because Minnesota hasn't been a super strong hardpoint team themselves. So it's not like they were going up against like the Thieves or even Optic or FaZe, like one of these teams that you consider super strong at hardpoint. That they were going up against a beatable opponent specifically in that mode. So it was a good opportunity for them to try and, fix some stuff in hardpoint. And obviously, they get 2 wins in the mode. So you can, all things considered, you can look at it either as Toronto fixing some stuff or just Minnesota continuing to struggle in the mode. I guess we'll see based on some more results as we go through the next couple of weeks here. But yeah, it is also worth mentioning Attach did a role swap here. He's now running the flex and Priest is on the sub, but for a map like right away Gavutu hardpoint to start the series, that a role swap like that doesn't really matter because you're running 3 ARs anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like Attach has played well with an AR, but I feel like most of those times I saw him playing well with an AR was on Gavutu. So I'm going to keep an eye on that throughout Minnesota's other matches over the next couple of weeks to see what the role swap is or how that's working out for the team.
The final match of Saturday was the most surprising result. I know you said that you were surprised that London 3-0'd LAT, but even with that, the most surprising result of the weekend was Seattle beating Atlanta. Seattle entering this match, they were on a 5-match losing streak dating back to the last set of qualifying matches. Atlanta, obviously, they just came off of a second place finish at the major, despite struggles losing to Optic in the winners bracket finals, nearly getting swept by LAT in the losers bracket, but they were able to overcome and they were able to make it to the grand finals. It doesn't matter. They lose 3-2 to Seattle. Atlanta, they win Boca Hard Point to start the series. Then they win the control on Gvutu. But they lose. Really, it came down to search. If they had won that round 11 on Tuscan Search and Destroy, they probably could have swept Seattle. But they lose 5-6. Berlin Hardpoint, they get blown out, and then Berlin Search, they lose 6-2. So what went wrong for Atlanta, or I guess what went right for Seattle, depending on your perspective?
I mean, I think it's just a matchup thing at this point. Like the Seattle organization's got Atlanta FaZe's number. They didn't even need Nicky D this time to
His
take
presence.
care of business.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a sub now, so maybe that played a part in this. But no, in all seriousness, I feel like this was a very winnable match for Atlanta. In particular, I think I want to make sure I get the account right. CDL or COD Complex or CDL Complex on Twitter pointed out that in the Game 2 search, FaZe got first blood in 10 of the 11 rounds. And in round 10, he said Pred, or they said Pred beat out Arcides for the first blood by like 0.1 seconds. So it was almost, FaZe getting the first blood in all 11 rounds of the search. And when, a team as talented as FaZe is getting first blood like that, you expect them to close out rounds with all the talent and, especially the search and destroy talent. Like you expect those guys to put themselves in position to trade their lives after they get that man advantage and try to not let situations like that slip away. But obviously, I guess kudos to Seattle there for taking advantage of any mistakes FaZe was making after getting those man advantages, and they were still winning some significant rounds there despite getting first blooded. So I thought that was interesting. It was also worth pointing out, I believe it was, in map 4, Mac went like 29 and 14 on Berlin Hardpoint. So it was a really standout performance there from him after Atlanta wins the map 1 Hardpoint and the Gavutu control. I think the control, God, I can't even remember the map. It was a close one, and I think it was like it came down to lives in the last round, and somebody got a 2-piece on FaZe. It might have been like a 3v5 or something in the lives, and like FaZe didn't even have a fourth guy, but they still clutched up or something like that. Could be misremembering, but it was still a very close control there too. But if you look at it like that, that's just a round 11 away from Atlanta winning this 3-0, or you look at it as Seattle should win that control. So I guess you can kind of flip those back and forth. But either way, Seattle goes into game 4 down 2-1, and they're able to respond on 2 Berlins. The hard point was 251-61. I talked about Mac, but that's not necessarily a close hard point. And then the Berlin search was 6-2. So not really close maps there to end the series. And Seattle gets a big win for them, which if this is Seattle earlier in the season and they're not on a 5-game losing streak coming into this match, I could maybe see an argument for like a super close 3-2 win by them. But like going into this match, especially with their following their loss to Boston and just the streak they were on, I was not expecting Seattle to pull this one off at all.
Yeah, me neither. But really, the rookies stepped up for Seattle in those searches. Like Pred, he went 11-6 on that Tuscan S&D, which was a game high, and then Sib had a 9-4 scoreline in that Berlin search, with Pred going 8-5. So combining for 17 kills, I believe that there are only 25 total kills in that search for Seattle. So, those rookies, they stepped up, and when they needed to, they stepped up, and that's probably the most important part. Sunday, March 13th, we had 3 matches to finish out the week. The first, Paris versus Minnesota. Paris didn't really have that close of a series in their first time out of the week, but they give Minnesota pretty much all they can handle. They force a game 5, but unfortunately fall to the rocker. So they start 0-2 this season. But what did you think of Paris, the fight that they gave? They won that opening hard point and that Tuscan search and destroy. So they were reverse swept, but to even eke out that win in game 1 and to win a search against Minnesota, what do you think of this series in particular?
I mean, to be honest with you, the Paris shouldn't have even won map 1 if Standy just sits in the hill at the
Yeah,
end of that game.
I'm gonna pull that clip up.
Minnesota wins that one. So that was a pretty wild ending. I did want to go back and watch that full map. Just because, especially when it's like 250 to 248 like that, it's hard to, even though that was a questionable play by Standy at the end of the game, where it felt like if he just sat in the hill and it wasn't like checking all the angles, Minnesota probably gets the time there to close it out. But when it's super close like that, like a 2 point hard point game, you can look at a ton of different things throughout the game. Like there could have been like scrap points on just random hills where like people were leaving time with 5 seconds left to, go on rotation or try to get to the next hill. So there could be dead points all throughout the game. So it's hard to, like pinpoint that on just one play in particular, but that gets magnified in this situation just because it was literally at the end of the game, and all in my eyes and in the eyes of multiple other people, it felt like if Standy just stays in the hill here at the end, this should have been a Minnesota win. But Paris was able to capitalize on this in particular at the end and eke out a win.
Yeah, I mean, there were at least 2 seconds there where
Yeah.
he wasn't in the hills. So that's definitely something that, the coaches and the other players should be like, hey, put your butt in the hill. Like, stop moving around. Like, maybe if it's like 150 to 150, you can kind of move
Yeah, yeah,
around
yeah.
and try to slay out. But especially since his teammate did come down the alley where he ended up looking, so he was out of position for essentially no reason eventually. Just a really poor way to finish that map that they definitely should have won. But just a close series and another loss for Paris. They're 7th of the season,
Um,
or the 8th of
I,
the season, I think. So,
yeah, I think so. Beyond that map 1, though, just all things considered, when end of the day, that was a loss in map 1. You can say Minnesota should have won, but they didn't.
mhm.
Then they lose the following search, so they're facing an 0-2 hole. And obviously, we know this Minnesota roster in particular has made some comebacks in the past, and they have the ability to, regain, bounce back, not get tilted or anything by an early deficit. And they showed here again that they're able to, rattle off 3 straight map wins, take the series, pull off the reverse sweep. And I think that was a good sign. They definitely needed to win this match, especially, all things considered, where Paris is in the standings and having them just lose their match. Minnesota lost that match to Toronto earlier in the week. This was a needed reverse sweep for them, all things considered. And um, this was the series we were touching on earlier, where Jimbo, in particular, did not play well and was getting rather roasted.
Yes.
Um, I think there was some misconceptions about ping and stuff like that. I saw like Nameless might have tweeted something,
Yeah.
and then someone in like League Ops like tweeted that like that wasn't the case. So I don't want to harp on that too much or anything like that. But Jimbo's a rookie player. This is news where his first 2 matches obviously they did not go uh, the way he likely envisioned them at all. So moving on from that, I just got to see how he responds in Paris's upcoming maps, and I'm hoping for his sake in particular that he's able to kind of shut up some of the critics and prove some doubters wrong. If he is in fact one of the next up and coming players, you know he's got a spotlight on him now just based on these poor performances leading up to this. So he's got to either put up or shut up, I guess. Even though not really saying he was talking, but regardless.
Wow. Bink says that Jimbo should shut up. No,
Put up
but
or shut up.
yeah, Jimbo, he actually tweeted after the series. He said, quote, "This is unacceptable. GG's rocker. I will fix this issue or else I'm out," which is a very direct way of,
I like
taking
that.
blame for, what, I mean, obviously he's not solely responsible. In this case, they had, three more chances in the control of that second hard point in the S&D to win the series, but they didn't. So, I mean, it's hard to put the blame on one player, but that is kind of how the COD community works. If you're doing poorly, they're going to notice most of the time, and they're going to let you know about it. But he seems to be taking responsibility, and hopefully he'll be able to bounce back next week. Let's move on. We had two more matches this week. We had New York versus Florida. I mean, if you've been listening/watching this episode, you can kind of figure out how this series went. A very dominant 3-0. This was a 250 to 102 Bokich hardpoint. Awakening was like slicing through guys. Dave Patty was slicing through the other guys. They combined for 72 kills. And that's not including the Skies 28 and 24, Vivid 29 and 27. Clayster, not his best performance to say the least, 18 and 34 for a .53 KD in the opening hard point. Krim, I mean, he was running a sub, which is not something that we usually see out of him, but New York was trying basically everything. He finished 27 and 34 on Bokich hardpoint. Tuscan Search wasn't very good. Skies had 10 kills. Awakening had 8. 6-2 for Florida. And then Tuscan Control, Awakening, and Vivid both had 30 bombs. Hydra had 32 kills, so he did pretty well. But Neptune, 14 and 24. Clayster, 20 and 28. And Crim6, 20 and 32. So a really lopsided 3-0. Of course, congratulations to Florida, because with this win, they are technically in first place in the set of qualifying matches, since they are not only 2-0, but they are 6-0 in map count, which puts them ahead of the likes of like London. So yeah, Florida, they win, but the bigger story here is New York and how bad they lost. We've talked about it a little bit, but do you have any thoughts on this series in particular when it comes to just how poorly New York played?
I mean, yeah, if we didn't have the Paul X report 2 hours ago before we started the show, I would be going on a rant probably right now about just like, New York is chalk. They need to make a change.
Yeah.
Like, this would have been like the final straw for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, I would have been, they've made changes with Neptune and Royalty already, but I would have, probably been thinking about a multi-person change, or, something drastic would have to be done in order to swap things. But obviously New York, Crone, I guess in this case, beat me to the punch on that in particular. And now we know New York is likely making a change, at least one change, potentially a two-person change. So I'm just going to, save, my evaluation. I guess that doesn't matter if they're making roster changes, and we'll just have to see what New York's roster looks like in their next match and how they perform. But like you said, kudos to Florida, strong 6-0 map count start. They started this last major in the losers bracket, so barring a catastrophic next 3 matches, they should be in a good position, especially even if they went 2-3, they lose their next 3 just because of that 6-0 map count. That should be like some advantage to them.
Mm-hmm.
For like potential tiebreakers or anything like that. But this is, kind of like I hinted at earlier. This just the Florida organization. Obviously, they had success in Modern Warfare. Once the season moved to online, I think they won 3 of those home series online. But last year in particular, it just felt like they were a super up and down team. Like some weeks they would be frying on all cylinders and beating, I think there was one week in particular where they went like 3-0, and they started 3-0, and like maybe it was one of the I don't want to say numbers because I can't remember exactly.
I
But
remember what
they
you're talking
came out.
about.
yeah, they came out like really strong in a set of qualifiers last year, and then they just fell flat the one after that, leading into the major. They were like in a position to have a good seed for the major, and they didn't capitalize on that. So this is something we've seen in the past from the organization. Obviously, it's a different roster now, so my eyes will be on this Florida team moving forward here now to see if this is just another case like that, or if this Florida is becoming the real deal and um, a threat actually heading into the Minnesota major.
Before we move on to that last match of the week, I want to address Trimmer's question. He says, who gets dropped
Yeah.
from NYSL Clay? And we don't know yet. Crohn's report didn't specify who Paul X would be replacing in the roster. But is there a specific player in mind that you think Paul X would fit nicely to replace? Is there someone in the current Subliners roster that you think should get benched for Paul?
Well, this is something when we've talked about New York in the past too. It's just because of the legendary names they have on this team, in particular with Clay and Krem. I've touched on in other podcasts in the past that it's just like you're assuming it should be a safe assumption, but they are most likely being paid very well by New York, which means any roster change involving them, it's either they're just going to be sitting on the bench, like collecting a paycheck, or there would be a massive buyout to try and move them to another team, or just release them. So financially and as a business, it's kind of a tricky situation there. But you would assume just based on the role that Paul would be coming in for one of those guys. I feel like just based on individual performances, Clay has been very critical of himself. And statistically, he hasn't been putting up the best numbers. So if he was the odd man out, I guess from a stats perspective, I wouldn't be super surprised in that regard. But obviously, saying that Clay should be dropped or benched or whatever is something I touched on that hasn't worked out for other teams in the pack. Throw him to the Wolves and he comes back leading the pack, or whatever his saying was back in the denial days.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like if they are making a multi-person change, it would probably, Hydra's untouchable in my opinion. I think that's like widely regarded in the community as just, Hydra's not going anywhere unless like he demands a trade or something like that. So I feel like it would probably be a swap there for Neptune/Royalty and then Clay. But I guess, we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah. I mean, Paul is a flex, if I'm not mistaken. So,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like, you would think that it's Clay or Krem. Like, because one of them can run an AR, and that's probably what they're best at. But if, like, Krem, he was playing, flex this past week, and he was running a sub or whatever. Like, so he has the ability to do both, but it's just like it's a really what happens in professional sports as well, or in traditional sports or whatever. Like, these players that have big contracts or they have like a no trade clause or whatever, they don't like get benched for like rookies and stuff. Like, it's very uncommon that it happens. So I'll be very interested to see if New York does end up making a change and they decide, all right, like we really respect what's going on and we love Krim and Clay, but one of them has to be benched here. Like, that's our best move forward. I don't know if that'll happen, but it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing. And Mike says, NY this, NY that. All we know is that Paris is winning champs. So we have the guy leading the charge for Paris is winning champs crew. He is in the chat.
Just to wrap up on the New York speculation, yep. Regardless of what ends up happening for them, I just hope this isn't the last we see of Clay or Krim if they are indeed like one of the players to be dropped out. It would be super disappointing. Maybe not disappointing, but I personally, those are two guys who have, just been staples in the scene for so long. I know a lot of people in the community would be pretty upset if this was to lead to one of them retiring. That's just pure speculation on my part. I'm not saying that's happening or anything, and I certainly don't hope it does. But um, yeah, we're just gonna have to see what happens.
Yeah, one last thing is like we usually see guys in COD, they go out with a whimper, not a bang. Typically, we see like the players that were once at the very top, like Karma, like eventually they just don't have it or they don't want to put in the work anymore. Not saying that's what's happening with Crim or Clay, but that's what happened with Karma. He essentially hated the game and wasn't going to put in the necessary work. But we've seen it with other guys where at one time they were incredible and they were super talented, and Clay and Crim are literally two of the very, very best Call of Duty players of all time, without question. Whether you want to put them at 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, doesn't really matter. But those two are two of the best. But we might be seeing the end of either career at like this kind of level. So I hope that's not the case like you, but that is a possibility and people have to be aware of it. The last match of the week, we had the HBR Classic. That is trademark pending. Optic versus LAT. This was a really weird series. Like the scores make no sense because we have a pretty rare 100-point club entry with the LA Thieves. They lose 250 to 96 to Optic on Tuscan Hardpoint. Nobody on the Thieves had more than 15 kills. Nobody on Optic had fewer than 23 kills. Just a slaughter on Tuscan. Then they come right back. The Thieves, they 6-0 Optic on Desert Siege Search. So, like, and then Tuscan Control, literally 3-0, which, like, is really unlikely just based on how favored defense is on Control in this game. But Optic, they win 3-0. And then Berlin Hardpoint, LAT, they come right back. Kenny drops 36 on the map. Shotzi had 35 kills. And LAT force a game 5, which goes down to a round 11. Of course it does. And Optic are able to clutch up. This last map was interesting because it seemed pretty even on the Optic side. Scump and Illy each had 8 kills, Dashy had 9 kills, and Shotzi had 10 kills. And then on the Thieves side, you have Octane with 12, Draza at 11, Kenny at 5, and Envoy had probably one of the worst maps he's had this entire season. He goes 2-10 in that round, in that 11 round Tuscan Search and Destroy. So a really bad performance for him, and his team loses the map and the series. This is just a really wild way to end the week, but what did you think of Optic coming away with the win here?
Yeah, I mean, that was, you kind of took most of my talking points there, just the wild nature of the first 3 maps, and then we don't get a blowout in the last 2. So if for some reason you guys didn't check out this match, it's definitely, I would say this and obviously Atlanta, Seattle were probably like the 2 matches you should check out from this past week. But regardless, yeah, this is a weird series. I don't want to. I mean, obviously, in the end result, it's close. But like looking at individual maps, especially the first 3, those weren't close. So it's hard to evaluate exactly. But the big takeaway for me here is that Optic does get that round 11 victory, and although they did, they've been on a heater recently. I don't know the exact series count, but they won the last 3 online qualifiers. They would have won 3 matches in the winners bracket of the major and then the grand finals. So that's 4-3. So this is an 8 series winning streak, if my quick math is accurate.
It is accurate.
And leading up to this, they started 0-2, but both of those losses were game 5 round 11 losses. So here they're on the other side of the game 5 round 11 coin, and they get the job done. So I think That's the takeaway for me is just, they didn't let another series slip away that went all the way down to the wire. And really that could be like the only thing you could criticize of the team that's looked so dominant, especially recently. Going back all the way to those first two matches, you could say they didn't have the ice or however you want to word it. Now they're able to get that, coveted Game 5 round 11 victory here. So despite some of the scores of the other games and whatnot, that's like a good sign for Optic fans moving forward.
Yeah, so like you said, they lost those first two matches of the regular season, and they have won all 8 of their matches, excuse me, since then. And they are avenging a kickoff classic loss to the LA Thieves. The Thieves won 3-1 in the kickoff classic, so that is something to note, I guess. So that ends the first week of the second major qualifying matches. They really should start naming them stages again, so it's a little bit easier to say. But so far, 10 matches have been played, and right now the standings are as such. Florida and London are both 2-0. Boston, Toronto, Optic, they are all 1-0. At 1-1, you have LAG, Minnesota, Seattle, and then the winless crew right now is this incredible group: Atlanta FaZe, Los Angeles Thieves, Paris Legion, and New York Subliners. It's pretty much what we expected at the beginning of the season, is what I'm saying. Obviously, a lot of matches to go. Most of these teams have 3 or 4 before the next major, and every team qualifies for the major. So really, everybody has a chance to win that grand prize. In like a month or something like that. So I know we've went over an hour, so let's kind of just breeze through these predictions. We've talked about all of these teams quite a bit already. So we have another 10 matches of qualifying matches, or seeding matches essentially, over the next, so starting Friday, March 18th and going through Sunday, March 20th. Starting with those Friday matches, we have 3: Paris versus London, Seattle versus Optic, and Minnesota versus Boston. Let's start at the top: Paris versus London. I'm going with London. I'm expecting you to do the same.
I'm going to buck the trend and go with London. This is a controversial pick for me individually, just because I don't think I've actually... There might have been some match at the major where I actually picked them, but I don't remember. This could potentially be the first time I'm actually picking London. But, kind of like you mentioned earlier in the show, I kind of trolled a little bit with my picks last week, and now I'm only up 1 win on you, so I'm not letting you get a free point here, and I'll go with London.
Yeah, you're feeling the heat now. Seattle versus Optic. I don't think we disagree. I'm going to go with Optic.
I'm going to go with Optic too, but if it's just going to come down to what Seattle we get here, right? Like we get the Seattle who just beat Atlanta. This could be a closer series than some people expect, but I'm not going against Optic right now. They're clearly, as we just talked about, they're on a heater, so going with the green wall.
This one we might disagree with. We have Minnesota and Boston, 2 middle of the road teams. There's no like giant disparity in talent here. Who do you have here?
I'm leaning Boston, but you can make your pick first unless you want me to, and then I can change.
I'll go with Minnesota. I'm not like super confident on that one, but I think that I do think that there's a chance that Minnesota wins. Yeah. Maybe this role switch for Attach will kind of settle in and they'll be able to improve a little bit, but I think it'll be a close series.
I think that's a good point. I'll go with Boston here. I think that just speaks to the potential of this series. I don't think there's clearly a favorite, and it could go either way.
Saturday, March 19th, we have 4 matches on the schedule: Atlanta versus London, New York versus Paris, Florida versus Optic, and Boston versus Toronto. Let's start with Atlanta versus London. Atlanta, they're coming off of that loss to Seattle. London, they had a 2-0 week. They might have Gizmo back, but we're not entirely sure. I'm going to assume that they have Gizmo back, and I'm going to go with London in this.
Whoa. All right, well, I'm going with Atlanta. I would have gone with Atlanta even if you didn't pick London, but now I kind of like that we have more of a difference there. So, yeah, I just expect Atlanta to be possibly a little pissed off about that loss to Seattle and looking for them to rebound.
Next match is New York versus Paris. We're assuming that Paul X is going to start here for New York, and maybe another player. We don't really know, considering these matches don't start. This isn't until Saturday, and we're recording this on a Tuesday, so a lot can happen in the next few days. I'm actually going to go with Paris. I don't trust New York is going to be able to bounce back, even with Paul coming into the roster, and I do think that Paris will play better now that they have a few matches with Jimbo under their belt.
This is a tough one for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with New York. I went with New York against London last week, and I really just, after their recent performance, I don't really want to pick them here. But I feel like, just in the back of my head, based off of Paul X's ability to just come in for London and help that team, continue to perform well, I'm expecting him to be an immediate impact for New York, and this is a good opportunity again, kind of like I've talked about in other situations. Like if New York is going to have a new roster for this match, it's against Paris. It's not against Optic or Atlanta or one of the top teams in the league. So this is going to be an interesting one. Going to depend on what roster we see, all that stuff. But I am just going to bank on Paul X being added to New York's roster, and without even knowing the other guys, I'm just going to hope Paul X and Hydra fry and get New York a dub.
Next match is Florida versus Optic. Florida coming in with a 2-0 match record, a 6-0 map record. Optic, they barely beat LAT, but they are also the first major champions. I'm going to go with Optic. I really want to pick Florida, but just like it's really hard. Optic is the best team in the game at the moment, and even with Florida's hot streak, I still think that Optic can beat them.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Optic too. I don't know off the top of my head what their record is, but I think it was mentioned on broadcast that Florida's like best hard point is Bokage, and I know for a fact just because like only one map was vetoed in the grand finals of Major One there that Optic vetoed Bokage against Atlanta, and I know Atlanta is a good Bokage hardpoint team, but you would assume they would keep that trend. Optic would against Florida if Bokage is good, good map for them statistically. So that could be something to look at here and put the series in Optic's favor potentially. But again, just based off recent performances, got to go with Optic. Obviously Florida's 2-0, 6-0 map count, but this is their only match of this week. So we're gonna have to not be, if they get 3-0'd here or if they lose this at all. I probably won't be super critical of Florida just because we were talking about that up and down nature, but it's hard to say like they're going up and down just if they have a one match week following a 2-0 week and they lose it. So I guess if Florida's playing top of their game, they have a shot here, probably a better chance than maybe some people would have given them prior to their most recent performance last week, but I'll still go with Optic.
Florida is 6-2 on Bokage Hardpoint, including the Kickoff Classic. They are 2-5 on all other hardpoint maps. Boston versus Toronto. They finish out Saturday. The Saturday matches. I'm gonna go with Toronto. If I didn't pick Boston against Minnesota, I'm not gonna pick them against Toronto.
Yep, this is the Zinni revenge match again, and I'll go with Toronto as well.
Sunday, March 20th, we have 3 matches to finish out the week. Seattle versus LAG, Minnesota versus LAT, and Atlanta versus Toronto. I'm going to go with LAG over Seattle. I'm not convinced that Seattle, even with that win over Atlanta, is like totally back and they're ready to beat everybody in the league. So I'm going to go with LAG in this one.
Yep, I can see this one going either way. Going to depend, on what form we get from either team. But I will pick Seattle here, and they'll probably let me down, but whatever. I'll go with them.
Minnesota versus LAT. I got to go with LAT. I did pick Minnesota in that matchup against Boston, but I still think that the Thieves are good. And now that we know that they had a bad week of practice going into last week's matches, I'm assuming that they're going to have some better practice going into this. And this is their only match of the week, so they have until Sunday to kind of VOD review and look at Minnesota's match against Boston on Friday. So I'm going to go with LAT.
Yeah, I was going to point that out as well. This is their only match. I'm going to go with LAT as well. It is worth mentioning, kind of like I was pointing out earlier, that it seems like Minnesota has shown a willingness to play Gavutu, especially on a map like there where they can have Major Maniac Priest and attach all running ARs. And obviously, we know the memes with LAT and Gavutu, so we could see another Gavutu challenge here. But I'll go with LAT.
The last match of the week, Atlanta versus Toronto, a potential banger if both of these teams come out firing. I kind of want to go with Toronto, but I'm gonna go with Atlanta. I know I picked London over Atlanta, but I think London is better than Toronto, and I mean maybe Atlanta just turns it up and like they're one of like just on point essentially. After maybe losing to London or just thrashing London. There's always that possibility, but I'm going to go with FaZe.
Very surprised if you picked Atlanta to go 0-2. But yeah, I'm going to go with Atlanta here. We just saw this match at the major, and Atlanta won 3-0. So although this was during the skid where Toronto was not winning hard points, when they lose 3-0, they're only playing one hard point. So I'm just going to go with Atlanta.
And that does it for our predictions. Again, you are 35-23 after going 5-5 last week. I am 34-24, just a game back after going 8-2 last week. So hopefully you suck again, and I do well, and and I overtake you for this week. But that about does it. We've covered a lot. We covered all of the New York stuff, and there will probably be updates after this podcast is live. That's kind of the case for every single podcast. Essentially, there's always news. But this is just something we got to deal with, I guess. But yeah, this will be going up Wednesday morning, just like every other podcast that we do. Make sure to follow or subscribe to the Ego Chall Podcast feed. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Also, give a good rating, 5 stars preferably, on whatever platform you're listening on. You can follow us on Twitter. He's at jbink with 2 Ks. I'm at Preston Byers, and the podcast Twitter's at Ego Chall Podcast. The next live show is scheduled for Tuesday, March 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We're actually daylight savings time, so I don't know if that screws up anybody, but like whatever, set your clocks or whatever. Twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. We'll be here next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, the podcast should be in your feed on Wednesday morning or on YouTube or whatever. So make sure to refresh it and like and subscribe. That's it for me. Take it away, Bink.
Yeah, I'm going to just bring this up real quick because it was literally just tweeted 8 minutes ago. Paul X tweeted, "Big lights will inspire you." Obviously, a little bit of a tease there for Empire State of Mind. And then he tweeted 4 minutes after that, "Easy Farms, little do y'all know, I'm spawning in with Sheen and Doug tomorrow." So seems like Paul X is having a little bit of fun on the Bluebird app there with this Crow News. But yeah, all that aside, thank you guys as always for tuning in. Had a lot of fun talking about everything tonight. Hope you guys enjoyed. And as always, remember to send the chow.